He was nothing like I had imagined a police detective to be. He was definitely not as big or impressive, and he sweated a lot. Every time I saw him, he was holding a bag of cornflakes and eating them one by one. He wasn't unfriendly or intimidating, but it was hard to befriend him. Mr. Fromut, we can't release you before tomorrow morning. There's no one to handle the paperwork on Sunday evening. Samuel Green tried to be professional and friendly at the same time. He failed. I had been in the holding cell for 3 days, and now he was telling me I had to stay another night. It was all very confusing. I wasn't supposed to be here at all. I think they were eager to pin the murder on someone. Unfortunately, I wasn't good enough for them. All I could do was look at him across the table and shrug. Damn it, I didn't want to leave anyway. I was disappointed when they said the charges against me wouldn't be dropped. Those bastards were sending me home. They were sending me back to my wife and family. Sending? Sending me back? No bail and no refund. I felt like an old soda bottle. The good news is that tonight you can order dinner from Stakeout. The money is now coming from a different fund. You can order whatever you want. I gave him a weak smile. Sam, will you be here in the morning? Of course. Why do you ask? Well, I was hoping you could help me a little with my release. What do you mean? Well, I'll be completely free, right? Yes, without any conditions. Is there any way you can release me without informing my family? When Sam Green laughed, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. You mean you want to sneak out the back door? After I nodded, he shook his head. She really hurt you, didn't she? I nodded again. Here's what I'll tell you, John. You decide what you want, and I'll figure out how to help you achieve it. Is that okay? That evening, I had chicken for dinner, and all my friends were envious. After finishing the fried apple pie, I spent the rest of the evening reflecting on what had happened and trying to make plans for the future. The recounting seemed to go well, but I had no idea what my plans would be. I worked at the Northeast Regional Distribution Center for Ace Hardware. I loaded and unloaded trucks all day. It wasn't very demanding, but I liked it, and the pay was decent. With that salary, I fed my family and raised 2 wonderful boys. Todd was 16, and Jeremy was a year younger. My marriage and my life were great until I was arrested 3 days ago. The arrest went fairly smoothly, but when I learned the circumstances surrounding it, things got complicated. In fact, I intentionally made things more complicated. However, at the time, that wasn't my intention. I was in the warehouse doing my usual job during my regular shift when the police arrived. My boss pointed at me, and I was immediately handcuffed and taken to the patrol car. This all happened in front of my coworkers. By the time I reached the patrol car, everyone in the building knew what was happening. Of course, I had no idea. Being a law-abiding citizen, I followed orders like a little puppy and didn't ask any questions. That was when I first met Sam Green. At first, he was a bit stern, but he spoke plainly the entire time. By the end of the day, his demeanor started to change. We spent a few minutes on the formalities of the interview before things got interesting. Sam Green was very interested in where I had been all morning. He didn't seem too pleased when I assured him that 15 people could confirm I hadn't left the warehouse. I tried to be polite and cooperative until he dropped his bombshell on me. Do you know a man named Thomas Esterly? He's not a friend, but I know him. Why do you ask? He was killed today at 11 o'clock in the morning in the parking lot of the Holiday Inn. His car exploded. Why are you questioning me about what happened to Thomas Esterly? I haven't seen that guy in over 15 years. What was your relationship with Mr. Esterly? There was no relationship. He was an old friend of my wife before I met her. I met him a few times, but we never interacted. What was the relationship between Mr. Esterly and your wife? Detective Green, you're starting to irritate me. Laura and Tom Esterly were a couple for a few years. I met her about 6 months after they broke up. I never asked her about their relationship. I suggest you talk to her. We already did. We talked to her for 2 hours today. Why? Your wife was with Mr. Esterly right before his murder. She was at the crime scene when we arrived. Suddenly, I didn't like the way the conversation was going. I had a good marriage. My life was perfect. Laura had never given me a reason to think otherwise. Of course, maybe it was my fault because I never looked for anything. It was because I never suspected anything. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Finally, my brain started working, and I didn't like the conclusions I was coming to. Since I didn't respond, he spoke again. Surveillance cameras at the Holiday Inn recorded Mr. Esterly and your wife entering room 311 at 9:45 and leaving at 12:30. Your wife returned to her car, and Mr. Esterly went to his. When Mr. Esterly tried to start his Mercedes, it exploded. Your wife was far enough away not to be harmed. Can I have a cup of coffee? He seemed a bit annoyed by my request. I had interrupted his train of thought. I needed a little break to gather my thoughts. I had just learned that my wife of 18 years had cheated on me. My entire life was built around her and the children we had together. Everything was falling apart. No, I didn't kill Thomas Esterly, but I really wished I had. The rest of his questions would be redundant. Sam Green stepped out of the room for a moment and returned with cups of black coffee from the vending machine. It was awful, but I needed time to think, so I sipped it slowly. Detective Green, can I assume that my wife confirmed all this information, or did she have some alternative explanation? No, Mr. Fromuth, there was no other explanation. We showed her the evidence, and she agreed with all of it. She met with Mr. Esterly, and they indeed spent more than 2 hours together in room 311. I know this isn't part of your investigation, but was this their first meeting, or had they been together before? Mrs. Fromuth indicated that she and Mr. Esterly had been meeting monthly for at least 3 years. She had no idea who might want Mr. Esterly dead. You do understand why you are our prime suspect, don't you? I finished my coffee with the last gulp. My body seemed to tremble from the bitterness of what I'd heard. At that moment, it matched my mood. Why would she confess to all this? Honestly, I think she was scared to death. It seemed to me that they usually arrived in one car. Today she had some errands to run, so she decided to meet him there. If they had followed their usual routine, your wife would be dead too. I think she realized that. Well, I suppose I'd better tell you everything so you can get to the bottom of this. What do you mean? It was me. I parked my truck behind the warehouse and slipped out so no one would see me. I planted the bomb under Esterly's car and then returned to work. I was gone for less than half an hour, so no one even noticed. Are you willing to sign a statement confirming this? Of course. An hour later, I was placed in my own cell. Most of the other inmates had to share a cell, but murderers got their own. So why did I do something so foolish? The truth is, it was simple. I was a quiet guy, but proud. What I thought about myself mattered to me. Of course, that meant what other people thought of me mattered too. This situation changed everything in an instant. It became clear to me that my wife didn't think much of me. I believed Detective Green when he said Laura had been having an affair with Thomas Esterly for 3 years. Not because of any information I had, but simply because she would never make up something like that, and neither would he. I not only didn't want to live with her anymore, I didn't even want to see her. I was sure she would have a logical explanation for everything, but I didn't want to hear it. The best way to avoid seeing her was to go to jail. My relationship with my 2 sons had always been great. I never did anything that could embarrass them or make them feel that I was a bad father. Right now, I didn't feel like a good father. I was a cuckold. My wife, their mother, openly admitted to sleeping with another man. There's no way that information wouldn't reach them. I realized that once it did, I wouldn't be able to look my sons in the eye and hold my head high. She humiliated me in front of my boys. She stripped me of my dignity as a man in the eyes of my children. How could I face them without feeling that I had let them down? The best way for me to handle this was to show the world that when I found out what was happening, I took action to stop it. I killed the son of a bitch who ruined my marriage. Then my sons could at least be proud of how their father handled the situation. In reality, I regretted not actually doing it, but it would be better than nothing if I could at least get some credit for it. Anyway, I didn't want to see my sons any more than I wanted to see my wife. I couldn't return to work. I played cards and bowled with all those guys. If they found out my wife had been leaving me for 3 years, I would never live it down. The humiliation I would have to endure would be too much for me. So there was no way I could go back to Ace Hardware. The situation with my family would be exactly the same. I didn't want to face any of them. There was no explanation for what Laura did to me that wouldn't make me look like a weakling. My only hope was to go to prison and forget about them all. The plan was to avoid a trial by submitting a guilty plea. In movies and on TV, they always offer a plea deal to avoid the costs and hassle of a trial. All I had to do now was wait to be formally charged. I didn't care what happened to me, but I refused to stand face to face with a bunch of people I knew and look like a cuckolded loser. One of the nicest things about being in jail was that I could refuse visitors. I was more or less forced to talk to my appointed public defender, but I declined to meet with my wife or my brother Will. Other than my lawyer, I spent most of Friday alone. They gave me a newspaper, and it had all the articles about Thomas Esterly's death. They called me the suspected killer and Laura the Holiday Inn cheater. My sons must be very proud of me. It turned out that Esterly had made a small fortune in real estate and had also married well. Sam Green stopped by after dinner. "John, I have just one question for you, and then I'll let you go. Where did you get the black powder to make the bomb?" "Last summer at the Lancaster Fair, there was a gun show. I have 2 cans, but I don't have a receipt." I realized something had happened as soon as I answered him. He had a wide smile on his face as he left the cell. I'm not sure, but I thought he winked. I thought my answer was pretty good because the guys and I had actually gone to that gun show. Saturday started slowly. After lunch, 2 guys from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in Washington showed up. I didn't like them, and I refused to talk to them without my lawyer present. It was the weekend, and they couldn't find my public defender anywhere. They left after a few hours, but they didn't seem too upset. The rest of the day passed without incident, except for a very brief visit from Sam Green. He just stopped by to check if I was okay. I nodded affirmatively. He smiled again and left. On Sunday afternoon, Sam came back and we had a pleasant time together. That's when everything fell apart. "John, it took us a couple of days, but we finally put all the pieces together. I didn't like how you tried to mislead us, but I understand why." I sat quietly, waiting for him to continue. "The ATF guys were able to find out everything about the bomb that killed Thomas Esterly. They even managed to identify the guy who likely made the bomb, and they were right. It was C4, John, not black powder. Last night in Philadelphia, they arrested a professional explosives expert named Frank Donato, who made it. Phone records show that in the past few weeks, he contacted Sylvia Esterly, Tom's wife, 13 times. Sylvia Esterly withdrew $25,000 from her bank account last Wednesday. She refused to disclose what she did with the money. Well, that pretty much ruined my plan. For the next hour, I sat and listened as Sam Green described everything that had happened. Laura would have been collateral damage. Sylvia Esterly would have been just as happy if Laura had been in the car with her husband. And then it was all over. I waited for Monday to be released. No deposit, no return. That damn phrase echoed in my head like an Amy Winehouse song. A prison term would have left me with at least a shred of dignity. Now I had nothing. I lived with a cheating wife, 2 sons who I was sure had completely lost respect for me, and a job I was too ashamed to return to. I could no longer face my family or friends. The saddest part was that I had nothing to do with it. I was a victim, no bail and no refund. What the hell did that even mean? Sam was a man of his word. As I left the cell, I saw Laura, Todd, and Jeremy in the lobby. Sam took me aside and we exited through the garage entrance. He waited until the banks opened so I could get some cash. I left everything in the checking account, but took the $22,000 we had saved for a new house. Then my new friend, the detective, drove to the Ace warehouse so I could pick up my truck. Sam and I shook hands. I had my truck and a few dollars. I decided there was nothing in the house I couldn't live without. He returned to my wife and kids and I drove south on the highway. My first stop was in Knoxville. After a delicious dinner and a cold beer, I turned on my mobile phone. I had 13 messages from Laura, which I deleted, and then I called Todd. "Dad, is that you? Where the hell have you been?" "I'm fine. Are you alone? Can you talk?" "Yeah, Mom's in the bedroom. She's been there all day. Jeremy is here with me." "I'm sorry, son, but after what happened, I just couldn't bring myself to come back home. I'm sorry to leave you guys, but you're both so grown up now, and I think you'll manage. We're okay, Dad. Mom's a mess, but she isn't getting much sympathy from anyone, including us. You guys will have to take care of everything for a couple of years. I'll send some money as soon as I can. We talked for a few more minutes. Things with my sons weren't as bad as I had expected. It seemed they were on my side, despite my leaving. That night, I slept better than I had anticipated. By noon the next day, I was in Huntsville. I rented a small mobile home and got a job at a warehouse through a temp agency the following day. By the end of the next week, they offered me a permanent position. I was overqualified and underpaid, but it seemed like steady work, and the prospects for the future looked good. And I was just about ready to start sending money home for the boys. All of that stopped when Todd called. Todd and Jeremy had moved out of the house and were now living with my parents. Jeremy and Laura had exchanged some words, which ended with Laura slapping Jeremy a few times. He defended himself but didn't hit her back. Todd carefully explained that Laura was not to blame for anything. Laura tried to convince the boys that her actions were somehow justified. Todd struggled to keep his composure, but Jeremy exploded. It seems he called his mother every name he could think of. Eventually, it got to the point where Laura couldn't take it anymore. In a fit of rage, Laura screamed that they should just leave with their spineless father. Todd and Jeremy moved out the next morning. 2 days later, my father arrived in Huntsville with my 2 sons. I had no trouble exchanging my small rented mobile home for a larger one. Dad stayed with us for a couple of days and then returned home. Todd had the presence of mind to take their school records before leaving, so there were no issues with getting them enrolled locally. The biggest challenge was getting the 2 of them to decide on which car to buy. I think Todd won because Jeremy didn't have a driver's license yet. We heard nothing from Laura. She also never contacted my parents. Over the next year, I received 2 good promotions at work. We moved out of the trailer and into a small rental house. Todd got a girlfriend and a part-time job. Jeremy got his driver's license and a car, which was being repaired in the backyard. We handled the household chores together, but I had to do the cooking. I was at work when I received the divorce papers. I never got any explanations or apologies. I really didn't want them. I would love to tell you about the terrible things that happened to Laura, but I can't. She's out of my life, and I have no intention of letting her back in. I'm sure she's somewhere right now, sitting in a comfy chair or on a bar stool, wishing me well. The thought of that brings a smile to my face. Sorry, Laura, you lost. No deposit, no return.
Thank you for listening until the end.